Hi, welcome to today's video. My name is Paul. So this week I'm going to take a very brief look at the idea of color theory. It's one of those things in art that is quite complicated, and people make it even more complicated than maybe it needs to be, in my opinion anyway. So I want to approach it from, is there anything practical that I can get out of these ideas that I can actually apply to my own art? And there are at least one thing, maybe two or three, but at least one thing. So that's what I'm going to try and talk about this week. So very briefly, this is just skimming the surface of color theory, but just so we all are on the same page. One of the key ideas in color theory that you'll see in a lot of art textbooks is this idea of the color wheel. And according to this, there are three primary colors, at least from an artist point of view, which are red, yellow, and blue. Now, if this idea of primary colors, it's not, those are not the only three primary colors. If you ask a printer, they'll give you a different set of colors. But in terms of art, this is the traditional three primary colors: red, yellow, and blue. If you mix those primaries, you'll start to get secondaries. So red plus yellow gives you orange, yellow plus blue gives you green, and so on. And then you can also have tertiary colors. So if you mix yellow and orange, you get a yellowish orange. If you mix red and orange, you get a reddish orange, and so on and so on. But that's the basic idea of the color wheel. And we're going to use this to illustrate at least one thing that I think is interesting and might be useful and practical in making art. So once you've got your color wheel, you can then start to pick colors that have different, they react with each other in different ways. For example, you can have complementary colors. So on the left-hand side, two complementary colors could be red and green. So they're opposite each other, or near enough opposite each other on the color wheel. So they're complementary colors. Blue and orange would be another one, for example. Complementary colors tend to clash. They tend to be, well, complementary. They react off each other, kind of thing. In some ways they can heighten the feeling of each color, but they also have this sort of clash of colors. Red and green, sometimes in a painting, it can actually be almost painful to look at least for some people. Apparently not everybody reacts in this way. I do. It's difficult for me to look at certain patterns or certain colors that are next to each other that tend to clash. It's almost painful to look at. Red and green is an example of this. But we have this idea of complementary colors. We can take it a step further and talk about split complementary colors. So again, starting with green, but instead of matching red to it, we sort of split that and choose purple and orange. So they're still kind of opposite each other on the color wheel, but now you've got three colors: purple, orange, and green. We can start using this to make paintings and see what happens. So this is just a little digital painting, if you like. On the left-hand side was the original, and it's just me just picking colors. They're mainly representational colors. So the grass is green, the sky is blue, and so on. But then on the right, I decided to go with that split complementary color scheme. So I'm keeping the green, but instead of using red or the direct complementary, I sort of split off, and I used a sort of pinkish purple and orange. When you use that sort of color scheme, I think the first thing that happens is you're not getting really representational colors anymore. So the sky is no longer blue. I've changed it to green. And The ground in front of the little cottage is no longer sort of earthy colours. It's now a mixture of pinks and purples together with some earthy browns or oranges. In other words, these split complementary systems, or whatever, kind of artificial colour scheme you want to use, they can be very interesting. They can be quite novel, but they're not necessarily representational. So I guess it depends what type of art you're trying to create. Do you want your color scheme to be representational or not? Of course, there's lots of different split complementary colors you could use. There's also a different way of thinking about it. So I'm taking it quite literally. I'm using those three colors mainly as the colors in my picture. But some people have a different approach. If they're using a liquid paint, oil or acrylic or whatever it is, they'll pick those three colors, green, orange and purple, and they put them onto their palette, and then they start mixing with those colors. So they can create almost an infinite number of colors, but they're basing it just on those three. So in that system, those three colors, the green, orange and purple, become their kind of primaries, and then they'll mix secondary and tertiary colors from that. It's a different way of using this idea of split complementary color schemes or any other type of color scheme, and there are a lot of them out there. So for me, this sort of approach is not that useful. I don't find it very practical. It's interesting, yes, but it doesn't really work for me. It's not something that I use that much. Here's an example of a Fauve style landscape, and you can see they're using this sort of clashing colors type of approach. So although I don't find it that useful, there are artists in the past who have used this idea of sort of split complementaries. You can see greens and sort of reddish oranges next to each other, blues and oranges next to each other. They're using this idea of complementary colors. And I guess one of the things that the Fauvists were trying to do was just experiment with color and see if they could enhance the colors by placing these sort of opposite colors next to each other. For me, this sort of Fauvist painting, while I find it interesting from an art history point of view, it doesn't really work for me as a painting. There's too much going on. It's too busy. It's too much in your face. It's like someone walking up to you and shouting in your face. It doesn't work for me too much. I like paintings that are a bit more relaxed. So I use a different approach. Here are two watercolor paintings I've done. On the left is one from 2 or 3 years ago, and on the right is the style that I do these days. So the style has changed, but you'll notice the color scheme hasn't. It's the same thing. And I'm using mainly blues and yellows, and where they mix, you'll get greens forming. This idea is sometimes called an analogous color scheme, as opposed to a complementary or split complementary color scheme. So you're using colors that are on the same side of the color wheel rather than on opposite sides. So blue and yellow and the green in the middle, they're all on one side of that color wheel. If we go back and look, you can see on the left hand side, blue, yellow and green, they're all at the bottom end of that color wheel. So that creates, I say, an analogous color scheme. That creates a more gentle sort of landscape. It's not someone walking up and shouting in your face. It's maybe someone walking up and whispering in your ear kind of thing. It's a little bit different, certainly different feel. So that is something that is practically useful. I think it's something that I actually use from this whole color theory thing. At the moment, it's really the only thing that I use, but it is something. So it has definitely shaped my landscapes, at least for watercolor. With other media, I don't do this as much. I tend to be a bit more experimental in colors, but at least for watercolor, I did use this idea of analogous colors and creating a more gentle feeling, if you like, to the finished landscape compared to, say, the Fauves landscape. Okay, that's it as far as me with color theory. I don't go into it too deeply. I don't, like other things, I don't treat it as a set of rules. It's just interesting ideas which I can choose to use or to ignore. It's just my approach to making art. I don't like the idea of too many rigid rules, because then I feel that those rules are putting restrictions on me and my creativity, and I really don't like that, because my art is based on the whole idea of being creative, trying different things and experimenting with different things. If you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching and listening, and hopefully see you again in next week's video.